Tip, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement here. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Graves, aka Big Mike.
Namaste, brother.
And this is our first program for 2022. We'd like to welcome you, our viewing audience. We both have been on community assignment for these last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to be here, but we're glad to be here. Isn't that true, Mike?
Oh, yes, sir, brother. And let me just tell you, the people that I run into, they think the world of you and Julian. And I had to tell them that when they said, brother, you make all these points, and I just want everybody to know that Noel is really like the host where he's posing the questions. Noel could answer them the same way that I do. Most people don't know that, but he makes me look good by having me answer a lot of these questions first, and he'll just cover what I missed. So just, so it's not that, I'm making penetrating insights that Noel can't do. It's just that he sets me up to look good. So thank you, brother, for what you do.
Well, thank you, brother. And thank you, our viewing audience. As is customary, we'll open up the program with some historical piece. The first one we wanted to remember is the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. on January 15th, 2029.
Right, and he's so great that I'll just get the special field order out of the way first by just saying that that's the order, the special field order. 15 is the order that people just basically call it 40 acres and a mule. That was done by William Tecumseh Sherman the last year in 1865 of the Civil War. And our people expected that. That was dismissed by President Lincoln, obviously, but at that time, he felt it wasn't a robbery with all the enslaved Africans that was free, that to get them on the road to success, they needed those 40 acres and a mule. Your comments, Noel, or should I keep going?
Well, I'll just briefly say, of course, that was a promise that was null and void. It was never fulfilled, and African Americans never got, a portion of what they deserved in regards to being able to settle themselves and their families after hundreds and hundreds and generations years of enslavement. At least this government could have granted them some land of their own, and a mule was significant because planting, being self-sufficient and be able to feed yourself, you needed a mule to assist in planting vegetables and other goods that you can consume. So unfortunately, that never happened. But just like the American history is full of unfulfilled promises made to members of the Black community.
Right, and so I would say, with respect to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a modern day Prince of Peace, one who chose to look at the glass being half full instead of half empty in most situations. We've always produced those types of us who would try to just extend friendship, even when friendship is not called for. He would try to calm things down and try to negotiate on our behalf. Dr. King gave his life to civil rights. He's a real civil rights leader, as opposed to those who are in the civil rights business. To him, it was giving of himself. He did not have to participate in the civil rights movement. He grew up in a middle-class household. With his educational background, he could have been the dean or the president of literally any Black college in America. So he did not have to take the route that he took. He took that because others stepped back in a critical situation involving Rosa Parks. He took that and he got on an escalator that refused to stop. And he didn't know how he was thrust into this, but he allowed God to have his way and do God's will in his opinion. And so he said he was a drum major for justice. That's what he wanted to be remembered as, not as a great, great leader, but a drum major for justice.
And on a side note, in regards to showing the commitment and the sacrifices, that he accepted, back then, that was at a time when being a civil rights leader wasn't popular. You weren't sponsored by corporate America. You wasn't given millions of dollars in donations and grants to your organization. You weren't given or granted the opportunity to host programs on major TV networks and major radio stations. Being a civil rights leader at that time was very dangerous. And, there was many, civil rights leaders who were murdered, including Martin Luther King. That was the price back then. Corporate America has realized that it's very beneficial for them to purchase modern day civil rights leaders, those who call themselves civil rights leaders, organizations who call themselves civil rights organizations, attorneys who call themselves civil rights attorneys. Today, it's a popular position to be a civil rights leader or organization or attorney. It's very little sacrifice. There's literally no threats upon you. As a matter of fact, you'll live a lavish lifestyle. You'll fly first class all over the world. You'll be given grants and awards and donations to your organization. You'll be a millionaire, as many so-called civil rights leaders are today. So big kudos to Martin Luther King. He was the last of a breed that is rarely seen today in terms of being fully committed to the upliftment and aspirations of African Americans. Nothing for sale, total commitment to our progression. And, he ultimately paid with his life, and he died broke, by the way.
That's right.
So big kudos to Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and just want to just commend you for pointing out that aspect, the sacrifices he made, because his family was at risk. And here he was at a rally and found out that his house was firebombed. And so he had to rush home, being concerned about his wife and children. He wanted to know were they okay. And when they reassured him that his wife and children were okay, he said, no, I got to go get there. And he had to rush over there to make sure they were okay. That's the kind of life he lived. And that didn't sway him away from continuing that struggle. So long live that spirit of Dr. King. And certainly he's worthy of whatever praise he got.
Right. All right. And the last historical piece we want to mention is the birth date of Abdul Khalid Muhammad, one of the students of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, may peace be upon both of them, whose birthday was 1/12/48. So much can be said. We can do a whole program about Minister Khalid Muhammad. And I know for a fact that the Black world would be totally different if he was alive. That's why the Congress and the House sanctioned him, because of comments that they disagreed that he made. But the boldness and the truth and the intelligence that he manifested made him a threat, because he was Black, unapologetically Black. And he really believed in the elevation of African people throughout the diaspora, not only in America. And he was a great man. But what are your thoughts on Minister Khalid Muhammad?
Well, I agree with everything you said. And by the way, Noel, you didn't mention that you knew him personally. Yes. I hope that's not a fear element that you knew him personally, and I knew him personally. And we enjoyed many conversations and times together. I would just say for the record that Minister Khalid Muhammad, not only was he one of the greatest ministers ever to come out of the Nation of Islam, he taught what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught. He taught a bold truth. some might say, call it raw truth. It was truth. Now, he was censored by the government of the United States, but I don't recall them calling him a liar. I don't recall anyone ever referring to anything that Dr. Khalid Muhammad said as a lie. They might not have agreed with it. They might have had a problem with him saying it. They might have had a problem with context, but the raw, unmitigated truth, they know that it was, and they would have to acknowledge that. I thought that when Minister Khalid Muhammad walked in the room, you could just feel his presence. And I'm talking about Khalid the minister. I'm not talking about Khalid the Black Panther. Long before that, I'm just saying when he would walk into the room with the FOI, you would pay attention. You know, he was just that strong. He was just so sincere, so in his words, right and exact, that you acknowledge the truth. You was looking at the epitome of what the nation taught at that time, and whether he was speaking out of the Bible, whether he was speaking out of the Holy Quran, whether he was speaking out of the supreme wisdom, you knew this Black man didn't have a muting device in his voice. He spoke the raw, God honest truth, and just was so sincere. And if I use one word, it would be sincere, but he said what he meant and meant what he said, and he lived that life. And all of his actions is evidence and proof that he really believed what he taught.
And he was unapologetically Black. And, you know, I had the fortune to know Minister Khalid when he was at Mosque number 7 in Harlem, Central Harlem, when I was assigned to the 20th precinct. You know, we had each other's telephone numbers, and I had many conversations with him, and always respected him, always loved him. If you love Black people, you could not help but love Minister Khalid Muhammad. Oh, he was fearless.
Yes.
You know, he feared no one or nothing, and very, very intelligent. And, you know, our community definitely misses his presence, his voice, his strength, and his ability to appeal to the youth. And that's what made him so threatening, because he had a particular appeal to young people. And they loved Mr. Khalid, and they followed him, and they were attracted to his message. And they, you know, young people a lot of times have the ability to pick out individuals who are authentic, you know, who pick out people who are real, you know, and, you know, a lot of times so-called leaders today cannot attract a young audience because young people denote something about them that's not genuine. But Minister Khalid had that appeal, you know, not only to young people, I mean, to older people, but definitely to young people. And I'm talking, you know, like 12, 13, 14, as well as college students. So our community was done a great disservice when he made his transition. We believe, or I believe, that there's a whole lot of suspicion but behind his departure. And, you know, I will forever miss Minister Khalid Muhammad and never forget him.
Right, and I'll tell you for the record, I can't forget all of the Negro preachers who communicated in one way or another to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to suspend him, and they suggested worse than suspension, you know, kicking him out of the nation and all these recommendations. White people every day call us the N-word. They cut off people's food supply. They destroy institutions every day. They're not calling on the government to do anything about that. They're not doing anything when they see images of police officers gunning down and planting drugs on people, but yet they felt the need to reach out to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to suggest just that what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used to refer to as mischief makers. They became mischief makers and would try everything under the sun to do something negative that will ill affect the relationship between Minister Khalid Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So they was meddling into something that they should not have been meddling with. It is not their business on what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, how he's going to address or deal with the situation of what happened at Kent College, which is the speech that they all, when they found out about it, everybody had a problem with it. But if you had a problem with it, why didn't you call Dr. Khalid yourself and speak to him, and y'all would have that dialogue about what was said or the gravity of the situation? But instead, you chose the cowardly route to call his leader and to speak negatively and all that. You don't think that the government was listening to your phone calls? Because most of y'all are government snitches anyway. Consequently, see, Noel, I'm going to try to stop this. I'm going to try to stop this. I'm trying, brother. Just give me a sign if I go too far. But
bro, this community cop, brother, real talk. This is what truth and real talk occurs.
Always been, you in bed with the government. Consequently, you gave the government the green light to do what they did as an act in Congress, knowing full well that that's a death sentence. When you do that, when you censor somebody that way, and right now I'm so mad that I forgot the term that is called when an administrative body that runs a government does that.
Treason.
No, it's a term, it's a legal term that lawyers use, and that automatically, and that's why it is not allowed. If I have to wait till next week, I'll tell you it next week what the term is, so that governments are not allowed to do that. It's a British law which America adopted, because that's sentencing someone to death when you do it on the level that they did it with Khalid. It's an open green light to whoever's going to do it. They will not be investigated. It was crystal clear that when they did that, they were saying whether it was white hands or black hands or white hands, or whether it was whoever did it, it was going to be done in a way that there would be no investigation. And consequently, there was no investigation into what truly happened to Dr. Khalid.
Right. And although I definitely love and respect the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, always have, always will, Minister Khalid Muhammad, may peace be upon him, never said anything in terms of a form of incorrectness as it relates to anybody that wasn't taught to him by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad when he gave his followers the lessons. Lost found Muslim lessons, question number 2, who's the colored man? Minister Khalid Muhammad never said anything worse about anybody that was, in terms if you want to categorize that better or worse, that wasn't, that he didn't get from his supreme teacher or the supreme lesson. So, I mean, we'll forever miss Minister Khalid Muhammad. His breakup with the Nation of Islam definitely was hurtful to myself. But that's the nation's, politics or internal dealings. And, it was very painful. And it was to many reminiscent between what happened with the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, when, that friction caused a departure from the nation. All right, but kudos to Mr. Khalid Muhammad. We will always love him and always respect him and always bring his name up, on this particular program.
Right.
Final words, or that's it?
No, that's it. And if anything comes to mind during the show, just excuse me in advance. If I mention his name again, it's just that he's on my mind and in my thoughts.
Right. Okay. All right. Fast forward to today. Ben Crump Attorney Ben Crump has enacted a lawsuit in Louisiana regarding the mistreatment of young Black girls at the hands of white men. Many people don't know about the story. Michael, why don't you illuminate?
Yeah, the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, it oversees these children that are on welfare. And the problem was there's a group of wealthy white men, as they are being described, that were taking advantage of these underage girls and going in with their friends and raping them. And this went on for a while, and until they were able to get the word out. And the first one they caught was a white man, John Mack, who was one of the people going back as long as 2019. And then he would bring in a whole group of rich white guys, and they was all taking advantage of 13 to 14 and 12-year-old girls. And this went on, and the city has been slow to prosecute. They did levy charges against him when it became apparent, because these little girls were putting in their complaints, but up to now they have received no justice. And he has two nephews, besides him being rich. He has two nephews that are elected officials in that town. So he's being protected by them and his nephew's friends in the government. So he's gotten away with it. So there's a lawsuit going on right now that Ben Crump, who unfortunately, he's the settlement czar. So he's going after the city itself. He's suing the city, where the first thing he should do is to seek criminal charges against the John Mack and all of his cohorts that are raping little girls as we speak. So again, the settlement czar is not the attorney at war, Automatics, because the first thing Automatics would do is make sure that all of them are behind bars. Right. Then whatever legal action follows. But first, they have to be arrested and taken off the street, because these rich white men are menacing to the Black community. They are menaced to society. So consequently, he's gonna settle. But I won't get ahead of that. I'll just say, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I totally agree with you. The first order of the day when the crime has been committed is to attempt to proceed criminally. Civil actions, the young ladies being compensated is important, but the first order of the day is to press criminal charges against the culprits. Now, I'm not certain if he attempted to do that, but are you saying that at this point, no criminal charges have been filed? Because the last time I checked, rape, especially when you talk to minors, is a crime in all states, under the jurisdiction of the America jurisprudence. So there's no territory in America where rape is not a felony. So I don't understand why there's no criminal prosecution. As you stated, Mike, he definitely should be leaning in that direction. But if a district attorney refuses to enact criminal charges against those individuals be identified as culprits, hopefully during civil proceedings, when he gets the opportunity to depose those individuals, some of this criminal activity can be leaked out. But as you correctly stated, he very rarely seeks deposition. He seeks money, and he seeks an award, and he never presses the issue of criminality, prosecution, conviction, and sentence. He presses for monetary compensations. Of course, he gets his 33 1/3%, and then he's on to the next situation. So, I mean, this whole story is baffling to me. I'm glad you brought it up. I'm definitely going to look a little further into it. So a lot of this seems reminiscent of what the Catholic Church was accused of doing to young children as well. And, we definitely will follow up. But, so what you're saying at this time, there's no criminal charges, no one has been arrested You know,
No,
I
only
don't know.
one person was arrested, which is the guy Mac. He was arrested because he's been doing it for years. He's been exploiting these little girls for years. He's pathological. He's whatever term, you know, the person who keeps repeating a crime.
Right.
He's that. So he can't help himself.
Predator. He's the predator.
The predator. He's a predator. So he was the only one that was charged since 2019, but he up to now he doesn't have a court date. And this is going back to 2019 because he's got two of the leading elected officials are his nephews. So they're basically running things, and I'm gonna give you their names so you know. Like I said, John Mack's nephews are Sherman Mack, and his Sherman Mack's brother is Councilman Shane Mack. So you have two people in government that are powerful, and that family is allowing him to remain free. And up to now, he hasn't even been, he was just been charged, but was let go. So he's still on the street and still doing what he does.
Right. Okay. We definitely have to follow up to see if he's out on bail or if the district attorney in that area have dropped charges on him.
Shouldn't be out on bail. Well, what he needs is you know what he needs.
Yes, sir. Okay, but we'll follow up on that particular story. You know, thank you for bringing it up. All right, old story that happened since we last were on the program. We knew that the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery were convicted, but since we were last on the air, all three of them have been convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Travis and Gregory McMichael has received life with no option for parole. William Bryan has received life, but in 30 years he can request for parole. This heavy sentencing, many people were surprised. It's definitely fitting, as all three of these individuals pursued an innocent man, made false accusations against him, and then ultimately took his life. They were under the assumption that they would get away with it after making false claims. There's even a district attorney in that area who's been charged with attempting to conspire not to prosecute these individuals, although she had the fiduciary responsibility as a state representative, as a state prosecutor, to prosecute them. So she finds herself in trouble and she's being prosecuted. But many people are happy that I believe the jury was even mostly white, have not only convicted these three individuals, but sentenced them to life imprisonment. Michael, your comments.
Yeah, I would just concur with everything you said. Jail is too good for them, but if they are going to spend the rest of their lives in jail, as opposed to the death penalty, then fine. At least all three of them are looking at life. Is it life, no parole, or all of them got about 30 to life?
One of them, William Bryan, the individual who shot the film, he got, all three of them got life, but he got life, but in 30 years he can request parole.
Right, I knew it was one. Yeah, okay, right. Him.
The other two got life without no option for parole.
Good.
That's a father and a son.
Well, that's good. So at least they'll never see the light of day, and they don't deserve it. The world's a better place without all three of them.
Right. Okay. All right. We have a story in Baltimore involving four Black female police officers. They have filed a class action lawsuit against the Baltimore Police Department for racial discrimination, something that we see all over the nation, forever. Michael.
Right. With this particular one, it cannot be ignored because you're talking about a police department that's certainly out of control, and they're not only falling for discrimination, they're saying that the department has a culture of racial discrimination, sexual harassment, and retaliation. Now, the form that retaliation takes is nothing to play with. They fear for their actual safety. They are afraid to go to work. And even at work in uniform, they are afraid while they are on duty. Now, what police officers should have to go through that, where while you are on duty, wearing a uniform, shield and ID, reflecting the department, doing your public safety duties, you are afraid that you can be killed by your fellow police officer or set up with drugs. They have said things like they saw drugs being planted on people in the street. So they are afraid, and this was all reported to the Final Call newspaper. Got to give them props. The Final Call newspaper, they took the story to them because they knew the story would be covered the way they laid it out. So they're saying that they have seen drugs planted. They are concerned about their own safety. Marilyn Mosby, the Baltimore state attorney, she requested that the courts throw out over 800 criminal cases. That's correct, 800 criminal cases that over 25 officers, dirty cops, were involved in. Now, one of the sisters, a police officer, Whitey Grant, says that she's concerned about her safety also, and she even mentioned, Whitey Grant also mentioned Detective Suter. Now, if you've been following Community Cop for years, you know that in 2017, Detective Suter, who was getting ready to testify against the Baltimore Gun Trace Unit, which was involving about 8 police officers, he was supposed to testify against them. The very next morning in federal court, he was killed the day before in a mysterious death that they cannot account for. They said it was a person that had on a white and black jacket at one time, and that there was a scuffle, several shots were fired, and then he was shot in the head. They later said that there was a scuffle. They later said that he attempted suicide on himself and killed himself. What happened to the person in the white and black jacket? What happened to his partner who was hiding behind a car across the street while his life was being taken? And why was he calling on a cell phone instead of a police radio alerting all units to report to that area? He didn't put out an emergency call. He called on his telephone, his personal cell phone, which shows you something is shaky. They never explained why his steady partner wasn't with him. His steady partner was giving another assignment, and he had a white guy walking around with him, and that guy disappeared when the action started. He was in an alley, supposedly investigating a triple homicide. They set it up nicely and killed that brother. And it's unfortunate, but these sisters are saying they're fearing for their lives. And a sergeant, and just to give you one more example, Noel, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Not only was an officer involved, police officer involved, but another sister, a sergeant, said that these officers tried to force her to forge overtime slips, and she refused to. She was refused, not demoted. She was refused a promotion, and the other sister, who was a police officer, didn't get promoted to sergeant because she refused to get down with filling out false overtime slips also. So how can a police officer put pressure on a sergeant? That sergeant cannot go to the tour commander and tell the tour commander what those officers under her are doing, because everybody's down with it. So these sisters got in this lawsuit because this is the only way they see of protecting themselves. So it's not like they looking for $1. They're trying to protect themselves because they don't want to happen to them what happened to Detective Suter, who was killed in an alley.
Right. Now, these sisters lawsuits, I mean, what was that, about 10, when did this happen? About 10 years ago?
No, this just happened.
You said it's in America?
Baltimore City, that's a part of Maryland, if we got it right.
It's a sad state of affairs that in 2022, the lawsuit may have been filed in 2021. Yeah. You have police officers fearful, not only one, because sometimes when it's just one officer, they can just categorize that officer as being disgruntled, borderline termination, et cetera, et cetera. But you have 3 female police officers, one's a supervisor, stating that they fear for their life because they've come forward with stories of corruption within their agency. I mean, that is a very sad commentary on the law enforcement body here in the United States of America. When you have fellow police officers fear for their life because they're complaining about corruption. I mean, this is reminiscent of what happened with Serpico, but that was in the 60s. That was yesteryear, but the more things change, the more they remain the same. I mean, Michael, I know you remember with Officer Boria when she came forward. Right, when she came forward to say that a police officer participated in the murder, Officer Lavoti participated in the murder of Anthony, what's his last name? Baez. And Commissioner Safe at the time, she was fearful of her life. She ultimately had to leave the department because she felt her life was in jeopardy. And police commissioner said that he was not able to protect her. So that happened over
in the Bronx.
Yeah, in the Bronx, over 30 some odd years ago. And yet we fast forward today, we have the same thing occurring in 2022 where police officers feel unsafe and the police law enforcement agency are fearful of their life because they complain about internal corruption within their particular agency. I think that's a sad commentary of where we're at. And these sisters ought to be commended and protected, if not by their local agency, members in their local agency, definitely by the community.
Well, yeah, and Noel, the distinction with this is they're afraid in their civilian clothes, but they're also afraid in uniform that they're going to be set up or killed. They said that they've seen them plant drugs on civilians. So they don't want to be caught up where they search their car or they search them and find drugs on them. So they fear being set up and they're afraid of also being killed.
Mm. And what's apparent is that they feel that they're a minority in terms of not having the support for the majority of their fellow officers. And that's a sad commentary, as well as an indictment on their police agency, from the commissioner on down.
Well, the commissioner on down covered the assassination of Detective Sean Suter. Right. And I've seen the comments where they got it. As a matter of fact, there's an HBO special on it on TV called The Slow Hustle. However, I remember when this first happened, the Baltimore Police Department did not want the FBI to do the investigation. They said they got this. Later on, that same police commissioner comes out with a fake letter asking the FBI to help out in the investigation. They were the first ones to tell the FBI not to do the investigation, because if the FBI really did the investigation, the suspects would have been the Baltimore Police Department, because the very next day he was supposed to testify in federal court against the gun trace unit, which is an elite unit within the police department, the Baltimore Police Department, headed by a sergeant who they've since found him guilty, and they found other officers guilty, and about as many as 7 or 8 cops from that unit pled guilty for a lesser charge, just to remove themselves from a heavy jail sentence. So you have a whole lot of people in that unit admitting to all this corruption that was going on, but since they couldn't flip Detective Suter, they killed him the very day before he was going to testify against them.
All right, so we'll keep the community cop family updated on the plight of these sisters. As I stated, I'm hoping that they receive the protection, not only from some of the members of the agency, but as well as the community in Baltimore. Well, here in New York, since January rolled in, we have a new mayor, Eric Adams, one of the former co-founders of 100 Blacks Law Enforcement Who Care, has excelled and been successfully elected as mayor of New York City. We want to talk about something that he mentioned in terms of his law enforcement agenda, which has been somewhat concerning to some members of our community, in particular, his reestablishment of plainclothes unit, as well as him speaking in support of Stop, Question, and Frisk. Now, the opinion of the organization, we've always supported Stop, Question, and Frisk because that's a very important police strategy. But we're sensitive enough to understand that the victims of Stop, Question, and Frisk abuse in our community, you have to really explain the difference and make a distinction between lawful Stop, Question, and Frisk and illegal Stop, Question, and Frisk. See, when you just say you support Stop, Question, and Frisk, to many in our community, they thinking about the abuse. They thinking about being harassed by police officers, being pulled over, being illegally searched, being molested, being abused, being arrested falsely. So when you say you support Stop, Question, and Frisk, many people resort to what they've experienced for generations under Giuliani, then under Bloomberg. So whenever those of us in law enforcement explain and make a distinction between lawful Stop, Question, and Frisk and good Stop, Question, and Frisk, and how they are a very significant and important tool for law enforcement, at the same time, we really have to make sure we make a distinction between illegal Stop, Question, and Frisk, because that's what so many people go back on when they hear that term Stop, Question, and Frisk. They go back to the abuse. And we're against bad arrests, but we're not against all arrests, just illegal, unconstitutional arrests. The same goes with Stop, Question, and Frisk. So we make a distinction of the abuse. Eric has a record. Mayor Adams has a record, has a past of speaking against the abuse of Stop, Question, and Frisk. We testified before Congress. Eric has testified before the city council against the abuses. But at the same token, as I stated, I understand how when you speak in support of plainclothes unit or Stop, Question, and Frisk, you have to be very careful when you address our community, because so many who are not in law enforcement revert back when you speak about that to the abuse. So you have to be very sensitive, even when that there's millions, literally, because for Michael, for like over 15 years, 16 years, there's been millions in our community that have been abused by the policy of Stop, Question, and Frisk, that have been falsely arrested, that have been assaulted as a result of illegal Stop, Question, and Frisk. Millions. There's millions that have been abused as a result of these plainclothes unit, in particular street crime, who said that we own the streets, and for years went throughout our community committing all types of crimes against members of our community. So when those of us in law enforcement speak to support of these useful law enforcement strategies, we have to be very sensitive when we explain why we support them, because so many in our community have suffered as a result of the abuses of Stop, Question, and Frisk, as well as the street crime unit. But if done correctly, if done legally, if done with the respect of the community, in conjunction with community members, Stop, Question, and Frisk and plainclothes can be a very useful tool in the law enforcement body to bring down crime. But like I said, I still understand, and the responsibility and the onus is on law enforcement professionals to make sure that we explain to our community why we support them and make a very clear distinction between legal and illegal, abusive and non-abusive tactics in law enforcement.
Yes, Julian Harper was really excellent at explaining the difference between that which is unconstitutional and that which is unconstitutional. Now, 100 Blacks in law enforcement, the reason why we fought many, many years against stop, question, and frisk is because the exercise itself was being applied unconstitutionally. The act of a police officer questioning an individual is a good tool for law enforcement. As a matter of fact, law enforcement cannot exist without it.
Thanks.
You know, if you see, as I said for years, if you see a person 3 o'clock in the morning carrying a grand piano on their back, I don't think those are the hours that most people are moving furniture. Consequently, you have the right, if you are given a report or a description of an individual that just did something and you go into that area, you have to question people. Did you see this, or did you where were you at this certain time, or just ask appropriate questions? It is nothing wrong with that. Now, when you're talking about some of the abuses that you could commonly see, people being thrown up against a wall and you digging all in their pockets and you're doing other things. But in terms of a pat frisk, if you're trying to get weapons and you have a reasonable suspicion as to somebody carrying a gun, and there is a science to being able to see an individual and certain things that a person can do that can tip you off that they might be holding a weapon, and you apply those things properly, there's nothing wrong with that. So unconstitutional searches are no good. They went from like 200,000-300,000, and then it went to 400,000. Before you know it, it rose up to 700,000-800,000. And when you say millions, well, we're using the stats from the Attorney General's office. Under Switzer said that NYPD only supports reports 1 out of 10 search. So consequently, when it was at 300,000, that was 3 million. When it went to 500,000, that was 5 million. And when it went to 700,000, that was 7 million. So that is abuse out of control. So that's what we was against, not the good police tactics with respect to that. That's a part of the Constitution where you can question somebody in a professional manner.
Right, and because the abuse happened of so many years and to so many individuals in our community, that's why I said that it's very important that when Eric or the police commissioner show support for this this strategy, that they explain, and there's some sensitivity to members of the community who have borne the burden and of this abusive tactics and abusive units for so many years. That's why it's important for them to explain why these strategies are important, to explain when they are utilized correctly, when they're utilized incorrectly, because so many of our community have been abused by these strategies. So we'll continually watch Eric in terms of his performance as mayor. I personally have a lot of confidence in him, to do certain things that are beneficial for our community. But here on Community Cop, we don't hold our tongue. We'll critique his administration like we would any other mayor. And he made some choices, in particular as it relates to education, and the commissioner, that we hope our community will benefit. We know some of the individuals that he elected to these positions that I have confidence in particular Banks, who they tried to curtail that appointment. And of course, Banks' brother in education, who's done an excellent job. Our organization has had relationships with both of them, doing out what to do and stop by the police seminars that were very instructive to the young people in our community that dealt with the issue of stop, question, and frisk. Over 30 years ago. We'll see. Everybody deserves a right to give an opportunity to show and prove, and we'll see. Was that it? Ready to move on to the next story?
Yes, sir.
All right, Oklahoma State Representative. There's an Oklahoma State representative who was enacting a bill that prohibiting that American history be taught in Oklahoma.
Yeah, he's Oklahoma State Representative Jim Olson filed House Bill number 2988, which prohibits teaching that the white people are the unique oppressor, and that Black people is the unique victim in the institution of slavery. Now, I don't know if he wants the language change, but he's got to be out of his mind if the white people were not the oppressors in slavery. Black people did not have white people in slavery. White people had Black people in slavery. Those are the facts. So if you want to dismiss the facts, say it. But to say that you have a problem with white people being characterized as the oppressor in that scenario, then you just don't want history. He went on to say that to teach that Americans are culpable in general, other than looking at what other nations did, is like saying, that America's wrong and off kilter. But Noel, we need to remind him that just because other nations did it too, does not mean it wasn't a crime. In other words, if one person does something, it's a crime. But if 20 people do the same thing, you just had 21 crimes. Right. So for him to say, well, other nations were doing slavery for centuries, so it's not wrong, is to make an excuse and say, well, Britain, France, and all these other countries that were involved in the slave trade, he's saying that, well, none of them were wrong. So if they all doing it, then they all are right, which makes no sense.
Exactly. And these individuals engage in revisionist history. You know, clearly they're ashamed of the history of the country, and as opposed to just admitting that fact that their ancestors and their kith and kin and some of these individuals who they hold dear had a checkered past, engaged in a Holocaust. So, you know, it's his argument is ludicrous, as you stated, Micah, to attempt to justify your actions, your criminal actions or the criminal actions of their ancestors by saying other people engaged in the same criminal actions doesn't make, you know, sort of like two negatives equal a positive. It makes no sense, you know. Right. So you know, we're not going with that. But real quick, we want to talk about the last story, Mike. U.S. Department of Defense has new regulations governing what soldiers can say. Real quick, we got about 2 minutes, Mike.
Okay, they're not allowing troops to participate in any activity that will encourage the overthrow of the United States government. They're against anything that includes posting, liking, sharing, and retweeting anything that's going to encourage people to move against the United States. Now, they are not barring things real quickly like the KKK, Oath Keepers, Boogaloo Movement, Proud Boys, QAnon. They can still be white supremacists. They can still do those white supremacist activities as long as they're not participating in the government. So you can be a soldier, you can be a Marine, you can be Army, Air Force, and Navy, and still be KKK, Oath Takers, QAnon, and all these other Boogaloo Movement, Proud Boys. It's permissible, but you cannot participate in anything where you're encouraging the overthrow of the United States government.
And that's ludicrous, and we'll talk about that maybe at another time, because the FBI has defined these groups as terrorist organizations. So that's a conflict. I don't understand how they allow membership into these organizations that have been defined by the Federal Bureau of Investigation as terrorist organizations. But at this point, Michael, closing comments?
Okay, I'll just say again that we love Dr. Khalid Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
We are sorry in his passing. And I'll just say, Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own and be yourself. And may the spirit of Dr. Khalid Muhammad continue, and just breathe encouragement and breathe life into our people as he did when he was alive.
Okay, on behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank our engineers, Veronica Kitt, Nat Wood, Sheila Berry, Big D. We'll see you next Tuesday. Peace.